Welcome to Business Talk, a global podcast series where we bring you closer to some of the world's most distinguished scholars and their impactful ideas. I'm Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Ling Tang to Business Talk. Dr. Tang's journey is one that moves fluidly across scholarship, creativity, and public engagement. A lecturer in cultural studies at the University of Melbourne, she works at the intersection of progressive market practices in post-socialist China, with a deep focus on feminism, queerness, and inclusive Chineseness. In her work as an activist, artist, and academic, Dr. Tang brings together research, teaching, art making, and public humanities to explore how ideas travel between the classroom, the marketplace, and everyday life. Her book, Burnout Market Feminism, Urban Chinese Businesswomen in the Internet Age, offers a powerful new lens on contemporary China. Through the concept of burnout market feminism, she shows how market-based empowerment can be real, yet still constrained by the competing forces of neoliberal individualism and nationalist governance, often leaving women not liberated but exhausted. Beyond the book, Dr. Tang continues to this public-facing scholarship through Forest and Trees, a Chinese social media account named in tribute to sociology as a life, promise, and practice. At the same time, her intellectual life extends well beyond the page. She is currently preparing her second English language book, 25 Women Who Shape Modern China, co-authored with Shirley Yi, and forthcoming from Routledge, along with her first Chinese language non-fiction work. She also creates music as a singer, songwriter, Len Down, produces fine art including moving images, and serves as an academic director of Hong Museum in Wenzhou, China. Born in mainland China, Dr. Tang spent much of her informative years in Hong Kong and later lived in the UK for more than 5 years. She received her BSS and MPhil in sociology from Hong Kong Baptist University and her DPhil in Oriental Studies from the University of Oxford. Today, Dr. Ling Tang joins us to take inside her remarkable book, Burnout Market Feminism, Urban Chinese Businesswomen in the Internet Age. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ling Tang to the conversation. Professor Tang, it's a truly privilege to have you here. Welcome to Business Talk.
Thank you, Deepak. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Professor, you open the book with the paradox of women's phenomenal success in China's online economy, alongside deep burnout and political crackdown. Could you take us back to the moment when you realized this paradox was just an anecdotal, but a pattern that needed a new concept, burnout market feminism?
Thanks so much. I think first I maybe giving the audience a general idea of how feminism unfolds in China and how the debates unfolds as well. So usually feminism in China would be understood with two approach. So first is the more state feminist or socialist feminist legacy. So since the establishment of People's Republic of China, of course, we have the Chinese Communist Party ruling the country. And since the very beginning, men and women are equal, are enshrined in our constitution. And indeed, so for instance, compare even to Hong Kong, China is 20 years in advance compared to Hong Kong to proclamate the monogamous marriage and to sort of abolish a concubinage. At the same time, socialist feminism, of course, is sort of rooted in Marxist feminism. And then there are truly alleviation of reproductive burden for women during the Maoist era with the work unit and with People's Commune. And also the labor participation rate for women was very high at the time compared to not just neighbor countries, but even, let's say, US or UK. So usually scholars who go with this approach would lament that the economic reform in China has made China, in the gender sense, more traditional. And then, so there's another group of research that looks at Chinese feminism via the lens of what I call civil society feminism, or more like liberal right-based feminist debate. And then with that debate, especially we can see with the recent crackdown on feminism. So most notably in since 2015, there's the detain of the Feminist Five. So they were young feminists just like myself, and then they were detained just for handing out sex harassment stickers on public transportation. Wow. And then, but we also need to remember that it's the same year that we had the 709 crackdown, which means the crackdown on Chinese human rights lawyers and human rights activists as a whole. And 2 years later, in 2017, so the time when I was about to start my field work, China promulgated this new law called Foreign NGO Law, which makes it extremely difficult for foreign funding to arrive for the development of local NGOs. And also, like, sort of the NGO or civil society is also intertwined with the feminism or gender's right or women's right in China as well. Because since 94, the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, the UN conference was held, China opened its door to foreign funding and opened its door to different type of NGO practices. So a lot of the predecessors that we know today sort of started doing gender-related things back then, but it was really until the time when I was about to begin my research that we see this like immense crackdown. And also with the one um, digital platform called Feminist Voices. And Feminist Voices, the founder of Feminist Voices is now in US as an exile. And also the platform closed and was shut down in 2018. And so since then, it has become somewhat official that a official narrative would be saying that, oh, a lot of these feminist contentions or feminist activism are foreign, are influenced by foreign forces or collide with foreign forces. But at the same time, I was like, if we only look at this two approach to explain what was happening in China, then our conclusion would be really straightforward, which is the future is really dim, like there is no feminism, or if we are to practice feminism, it needs to be with alternative routes, with the art route, with this route or that route, with like soft resistance. And then so I was thinking that if I could find another perspective to look at Chinese feminism. So I was looking at this phenomenon, which a lot of scholars would just criticize as pseudo neoliberal or problematic, which is the phenomenon success of women's economic success and entrepreneurial success, business success in the digital economy. So we're looking back. It's the same era, so which is the first two terms of Xi's era. So since 2010, so 1 year before she started as the president of China, China has officially surpassed Japan as the second economy in the world. But it was also the same time that we start to see a decline of the West, right? Since the 2008 financial crisis. And since China was and still perhaps is the manufacturing country of the world, so we have a huge surplus of products that needs to go domestic now. And then so it's with this trend that we have the rise of digital economy, domestic facing digital economy. And Jack Ma, for many years, was the richest person in China. And then he was starting something that I think was really interesting, which is called She Era. So to celebrate women's success. And then so, but of course the numbers would comply with it too. The numbers do show something. So in 2022, China's digital economy evolved 57 million women in areas like e-commerce or live streaming. So a large number. And approximately 23.58 million women have Taobao or like e-commerce stores. And according to Forbes, China is home to the largest number of self-made female billionaires in the world. And the Hurun Research Institute also reported that China boasted two-thirds of the world's most successful female entrepreneurs. So I was thinking that as a feminist scholar, maybe I can look at this group of women that would usually not be considered as feminist, but to argue for like an alternative way to interpret what Chinese feminism is. And of course, my idea is from my idea stems from, and I take inspiration from Professor Li Xiaojiang, who started the first women's studies program and first women's museum in China. And then so in her, one of the public talks that she made after late 89 and at the beginning of the 90s at CUHK, when everybody's criticizing human rights issues in China, she said, well, if people only look at why women cry in China, nobody would care why women laugh. I would love to let you know that if there's no women's right, if there's no human right, why would I even be standing here talking to you? Why can't we also cover why women laugh? So just to take inspiration from her, I want to look at this group of women who laugh.
Dr. Tang, Alibaba's idea of the She era celebrates businesswomen as a symbol of China's digital rise, even as the same period saw intensified repression of feminist and LGBTQ activism. How do you read this coexistence of celebration and suppression, and what does it tell us about the kind of empowerment the market is offering women?
Right. So in 2015, when Jack Ma was still at his peak in China, he started this notion, She Era, and he also organized like large-scale conferences to celebrate female entrepreneurship. And he made talks like, "We know that women would lead us to a better and brighter future. We are honored to host so many inspirational women." As we work to empower the next generation of female leaders in entrepreneurship in China. And it was also at around the same time, and even slightly before that, some of Alibaba affiliated scholars would publish articles such as the feminist characteristic of the internet, and saying that all this industrialization that we had before were like homogenized, universal, they're Descartesian, whatever, like Western philosophy. But however, we have this era that is focused on relationships, small things. And then these are female feminine traits. And then so we're looking into these feminine traits to guide us into a brighter future. So for them, I think it's a really interesting idea to interpret what was hailed as the Chinese dream, which is also President Xi's signature sort of initiative. But at the time, what Premier Li Keqiang his policy is more about the internet plus, right? But then how to really achieve that internet plus? It's to mobilize as many people as possible to join and become the self-made entrepreneurs. But at the same time, there's also this narrative of sort of like women should return to home and women should play such a significant role in family and etc. from the state. So we can see there's actually like this nuanced discrepancy between the She era and also the state's sort of like not just crackdown on feminism, but also the need for women to quote unquote play a special role in the family. So I think this was like really interesting to see the type of empowerment that is based on this very nuanced and interesting ground, because it's often assumed that the state and the markets work very tightly together in the Chinese context. But I was about to sort of like look into whether there are like these nuanced differences, so I can look into what, quote to quote you, the coexistence of celebration but suppression.
Dr. Tang, you narrate Yoni and Lily's Taobao and WeChat business selling virtual lovers and emotional companionship, which repeatedly face platform suspicion and policing. What did their story teach you about how desire, intimacy, and entrepreneurship overlap for young women in China's digital economy?
Right. Yvonne and Lily, they have this Taobao shop that it's really before the AI era that they already have this idea of selling virtual companionship, which is virtual lovers on their Taobao platform. It really delves into this three-way relationship, right? First, between desire and market, because it's the desire that drives the market. So a lot of like advertisement is actually about desire sells, sex sells. And then on the one hand, we see that market sometimes would be very much entrenched and intertwined with human desire. And then so they're actually like responding to this market that they think is based on lonely people or the people who may have the needs for somebody to be their intimate companion on a daily basis. And then so the second is between the market and the state, which is so since the reform era, the legitimacy of the socialist market now has been changed a little bit, not so much ideological, that focusing on we as a socialist supreme socialist country that is more supreme than, let's say, capitalist country. But however, because now that we're a socialist state with market economy, so the legitimacy of the state is now gradually shifting to depend on a successful market since the economic reform. So we can see this like kind of phenomenon also on, let's say, what many scholars research of the phenomenon of Danmei, which is the homoerotic relationship between men and men. This is a highly popular field and highly popular market. And so we now see a lot of the Netflix TV dramas from China is also sort of within this genre. So, but however, the thing is, should the state be proud of it? Or should the state curtail it? Because what the state need to do in the realm of desire is to regulate desire and regulate desire back to a hetero patriarchal. So not just heterosexuality as the norm, but also a clear division of men's role in the production sphere and perhaps women's role in the reproductive sphere, more traditional patriarchal role. So the state's role is to sort of like regulate desire back into that heteropatriarchal family normative or family oriented norm. So we see this like sort of very interesting three-way relations between among those three actors. And I think this is what can be discerned in Yvonne and Lily's case.
Dr. Tang Jing moves from a secure university job into e-commerce, becomes a local celebrity businesswoman, yet still describes her husband as more successful and navigates intense guanxi and drinking cultures around her business. How does her trajectory complicate mainstream narratives of the empowered businesswoman in China?
Right. With Jing's case, I think it's really the kind of thought that why she needs to perform such obedience to her husband, not just inside her company, but also outside her company, especially when she and her husband mingles with other business partners or potential venture capitalists, potential investors for their company. And so, in comparison, there's like this other book, which is Ling Feminism, by the Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg, published in 2013, which is about women should lean in and women should assert what we want in business. The new strong women should assert like feminism very clearly in the workspace or in the business realm. But however, what we see here is almost the opposite of it. It's not to assert like a strong woman figure. It's not to lean in, but to step back and perform that no, no, I actually listen to my husband. The reason, so she says in a public TV interview that the reason why she's so successful is because she listens to her husband. And also in her company's arrangement, her office is like relatively small compared to her husband's office. So she needs to make it like very obvious to her employees, many of them come to the company because of her, that it is her husband that actually managed the company. And then so she also does it when they meet with other investors together for their new companies. And then so during those meetings, she often shared with me this story that she considered the cautionary tale or negative example of the co-founders of Dangdang, which is China's most successful and most used book selling platform. So Dangdang was also started by this couple. But however, because of the family issue or their intimacy for apart, there are a lot of issues in terms of how to divide a company. So she doesn't want her company to be near that. But however, to navigate that intimacy is also like really difficult for many, not just Jing, but most of my married female entrepreneur research respondents. That's because of what you mentioned, guanxi and the drinking ritual that are integral to the guanxi practice. So usually, guanxi means like interpersonal, enduring interpersonal relationship in Chinese. But because of its significance in business or other practices, business scholars have been researching why is sort of like knowing guanxi so important in China. And then, so in guanxi practice, how to build that enduring relationship, it usually evolves two rounds, not just having a discussion like in the company about different clauses, but also about drinking together extensively. And also the second round of potentially consuming or getting involved in sex work together. And with that evolvement of sex work, it basically means that extramarital relationship is a part of the ritual in such business culture. And it's something that every businesswoman need to face. And also sometimes these intimate related ritual is not just about having intimacy with sex worker per se, because sex worker is actually not legal in China. So there are many like gray zones that you could observe in those banquets. And also for young women, they would be misthought or they would be taken for granted in a way that they wish to be participating in such a cultural, so that they would also face sex harassment and etc. So there's a lot here to digest for that. But basically, in order to make the business work, they would either remain more silent about it or to digest these with reticence, not to mention and not to talk about it with with especially their employees, but sometimes with other business women. That's what I've observed too, but in a way that it's kind of like a hidden role. So people wouldn't explicitly point that out in businesswomen's gathering, but then they would be asking each other how to deal with such situation when husband need to be evolved in such a ritual of business practice. Yeah, so I think that's like a big thing that they need to deal with. But however, the goal here is to maintain and let the business grow.
Drawing on An Byung-chul, you describe the digital economy as a burnout society grounded in auto-exploitation, emotional capitalism, and an ethic of do what you love. In your fieldwork, how did women themselves talk about overwork and exhaustion? Did they recognize it as burnout or frame it as a passion, duty, or love?
Right. So Han Pingzhou's idea of auto-exploitation is actually building on Foucault's idea of disciplinary power. So Foucault's idea is that, oh, you are being disciplined because there's this like omnipresent gaze upon you. So you're being watched in such a manner so that you need to self-discipline. But however, auto-exploitation takes it to another level that you are not disciplining yourself. You are willingly, happily, like burning out. Basically, you're happily sort of like doing such extensive amount of labor for whatever purpose, to be a normative person, to achieve economic mobility, to maintain a heteronormative family. You willingly, happily put a lot of effort to do that. And of course, in managing their business, when I was still doing my research, China's economy is still on the rise. And also their business, they love to link their business with the rise of China, with the rise of the East and the decline of the West. And then they carry such a strong nationalistic duty on their shoulders too. Like whatever company that they run, they want to be the next Apple of umbrella. They want to surpass like the foreign brands that they worked with, because a lot of them have been producing products via business to business route for a long time. Now they want to have their own brand facing the customer side. So yeah, in a way that they frame it as passion, duty, love, and then also the founder Jack Ma also said in 2019, famously, that 996 work ethics, which is working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, is a huge blessing for internet companies and for the employees. There was a huge backlash among especially internet company employees back then. But for my informants, they truly embrace it. But let's also understand that by the time China's economy was on the rise, and then we do carry this very optimistic sort of like sentiment toward what is coming next for the entire nation.
You show how economic independence through online business reshapes intimate decisions, including queer women like Vijaya, who use digital platforms to assert both livelihood and sexuality against family and social control. What does their experience reveal about how class mobility, queerness, and gender norms intersect in post-socialist China?
Right. So VJ VJ first started this exploration of her sexuality when she was very young, so around like in junior middle school. And then so she started to identify herself as in colloquial term a T, which is masculine tomboy. Let's put it this way. And then, so at the time she came out to her mother, resulting in her mother's strong repercussion against like her sexuality. Her mother is like, "You're such a pervert, like I'm going to disown you." But then her reaction is like, "Fine, you can disown me." And then so she really started like to explore in the digital market or digital e-commerce realm at really young age because she started sharing her love stories online in the Chinese digital forum, Baidu Tieba, with like other followers. And then as followers read her stories, love stories, they also start to consume the products that she sells. And these are some products that are so some of the products are actually targeting the LGBTQ market as well. For instance, the chest binders for other more tomboy identified, T identified LGBTQ women. And then, so at the point she's about to sort of self-sustain herself economically, and then also not just that, but able to afford a very comfortable life. Her mother, she has and gains that bargaining power with her mother and her family. And then, so now, basically, their family are okay with her sexuality and with her intimacy. But however, what we see with such a story is the compensational logic, right? So we couldn't help but ask, oh, what if she didn't make it like in her business? What if she couldn't be self-sustained? What if she couldn't buy a house? What if she couldn't make it successful like in her parents' eyes? Does it mean that she would have to go back to a more heteronormative sort of practice? Does it mean that she needs to go back and grow her hair, be more feminine, and then marry a man? So this is like the ultimate question that I asked with those stories. And then in the book, I have a section called "No Queer, No Success" that explains this compensational logic.
Dr. Tang, you argue that in China, the market can feel like a rare space for autonomy and feminists hope within an authoritarian state. And you describe market feminism as a kind of good neoliberalism. How do you hold together this recognition of genuine openings with your critique of the cruel optimism and burnout it produces?
Right. The reason why I call it good neoliberalism needs to be sort of put in juxtaposition with what would be commonly criticized as neoliberal feminism, or what the left-leaning scholars would usually criticize of the global late 70s, early 80s till now neoliberal capitalist term. So for most of the scholars that we would read, especially the scholars who work on platform economy or digital economy, have all commonly observed that digital economy is such a platform or technology that had made our life more individualistic and more about our own success or failure. So everything is on individuals' shoulders now because of the platform economy, for instance, with the work, platform capitalism, or iSlave. Um, but however, in the book, I urged people to look at the new liberal term in China in a different manner, because there's one work about the sort of economic growth of the West, especially US, that the main economic growth or the main uplifting of people's livelihood was done way before the 70s neoliberal reform. But however, in China, it is a matter of fact that before economic reform, um, the average livelihood and living standard of people were so low. It's only because and coincide with the economic reform and the new liberal term that people's livelihood had a genuine uplift. And that genuine uplift would equal to the maybe 200 years of development of what had happened in Western Europe and then in the United States. So the modernity in Asia is very compressed. And in that compression, it is sort of coinciding with the neoliberalism. So that's why I call it like good neoliberalism, because the neoliberalism doesn't necessarily end up in something that is veiled. So cruel optimism is the term from Laurent Balland, and then basically it means that what you are attached to, so what you think is optimistic, turns out to be cruel because it can never be achieved, basically. And putting that with the neoliberal term, you can say that okay, in the 70s, we think that ICT is going to change our world. ICT is going to uplift our life standard, transform the way we live, the way, let's say, electricity has done before, but it didn't. Or with the 2008 financial crisis, people think that platform economy like Airbnb, Uber would transform and uplift our life, achieve another economic miracle, especially in, let's say, US or Western Europe. Did it? Well, it transformed the way we live, but did it really uplift our life? No, it didn't. But however, with such a compressed modernity in China, would you argue that it does transform people's life? Yes, yes, it did. So I argue here in mainly chapter 3 that we need to really contextualize the neoliberal turn in different parts of the world in a very careful manner. So perhaps that optimism in this part of the world isn't that cruel. And then we can't just, let's say, bring in an idea, let's say neoliberal feminism, and then apply it to whatever that is happening in the Chinese context, and then explain it in a fashion that only focus on why people cry. And then so it's the same with burning out, right? Like why do people burn out? Why do people willingly wanting to fall into the thing that makes them burn out? Because they can actually get something out of it. And then so that's why I argue in chapter 3 that we need to sort of look at the good neoliberalism.
Sanmu's journey from founding the Less magazine to developing a venture-backed platform for sex education and organism, and Lisa's women and LGBTQ focus investment firm. So feminist projects moving into the market. What possibilities and risks did you see when feminist citizenship and activism are rooted through entrepreneurship?
Right. Thank you so much. So this actually calls back to Li Xiaojiang's idea of market feminism. So her idea at the time was really that so it is her that summarized these two routes that I introduced at the very beginning. So one is to look at Chinese feminism via socialist or Marxist feminist roots, and the other is to look at it via civil society roots. And then she says that if we're only having those a predefined idea of what feminism is, then we're missing like the big picture of what can people actually do in a bottom-up manner in what she would call among the people or 民间. But however, she also pointed out that in China, civil society, the relations between civil society and state could not be understood in the same way with the, let's say, liberal democratic society, which is the NGO being the civil society and then sort of doing a lot of civic campaigns and etc. Because such a route is more complicated in China. And then so what she argues is that people could put those more civic ideas or the ideas that challenges or opens up possibilities and imaginations of gender in market practices. And then so the two cases that you just mentioned show exactly that. And so Samuel was even a more NGO or civil society oriented activist at the beginning because she started the first La La magazine, so lesbian magazine in China. And then she turned into an entrepreneur focusing on sex education and the education that women have right to sexual liberty or orgasm. And then so that's like a very good idea. And also many of her early sort of posts in her public platform were actually about that. And we can see a lot of integrations of feminist thoughts that she has into this platform too. But however, the issue with those, same with Lissa's platform of focusing on women and LGBTQ investment, is that fundamentally this needs to be succumbed to the capitalist or venture capitalist logic. So you cannot just get angel investment and not deliver outcome to them. They need to see that your users are actually growing because I mean, users' data are the foundation of digital economy or platform economy, so that they need to make you meet yearly, half a year target, quarterly target, yearly target. And then if you do not meet that, perhaps your company couldn't make it to the second round. And then so with time, we will see like compromises in what people could advocate for. Because if the idea is to grow, then you can't control everything.
Dr. Tang, at one point you asked whether grieving for the privilege can also be emancipatory, using the burnout of the elite businesswomen to expose how everyone is trapped in the same systems. How has this idea been received by feminist audiences? And why do you think it is important to attend to the suffering of the successful?
Right. So in this podcast, I haven't had the time or space to explain the burnout of the successful yet. So in the book, mainly in the chapter 4 and chapter 5, um, the two substantial chapters before the conclusion, I explained my fieldwork in Shenzhen and Hefei. And then so in Shenzhen, I divide the entrepreneurs into two groups. One is the group that used to own like B2B companies and now trying to establish their own brands. And then I explain with my ethnography that even within the company, they need to perform this obedience to not just their husbands, but also like other men in a way, and not to challenge like sort of the gendered assumptions that are not working for women in their workplace. And then they do this in order to keep a very compromised female leadership that they need to uphold. But at the same time, they need to juggle with the fact that extramarital relationship for their husband, it's a norm or it's a social fact that they need to face in their family life. And then they need to sort of deal with that as well. So these are the sort of burning out that they need to face with. And then for the younger cosmopolitan group. I mean, the most notable example would be no queer, no success, no queer, isn't it? So it's like also this very compensational logic. We're already starting on a compromised ground, so I just like need to be ultra successful in order to keep that little breakthrough that I have from the gendered norm. And then in the last substantial chapter before the conclusion, I included my field work in Hefei and including my own experience of being facing sex harassed by Jing's husband in the field. It was a difficult experience, but experience that I think it's very important to be included in the book because it is via what I have experienced, via my own words, that I feel like a lot of the reticence, a lot of the things that were not said when I interview the female entrepreneurs were actually uttered. And it's also like only after I have experienced that I had a chance to discuss those with, let's say, Jing's other employees. So yeah, so I mean like burnout is like many layered. So for hemp control is more sort of like more entrenched in that one layer that is from sort of the critique of modernity and etc., the critique of capitalism, and then from Foucault. But however, for women, there are like of course more layers, and then that's also like one argument that I made with the book. Um, yeah, but however, I've been thinking, why, and also like in the book, I said that usually when we do a feminist book or when we do a critical work, we will look at the margins, right? And then so for instance, most notably with the book Made in China by Punai, and then so they focus on migrant worker from rural to urban China, factory workers. And also Karl Marx would also say that who are the revolutionary subjects? It wouldn't be the entrepreneurs, it wouldn't be the petty bourgeoisie, it would be the workers. So and also intersectional feminism sort of asks us to do the same. But then I flipped the question and really want to ask that but if we look at the people who actually made it in the system, are they living that type of a happy life that we're imagining, or are they still being trapped in the system and consistently think that they're still not enough? And then they're compromised here and there. It's the same system that makes very marginalized people very precarious with the system that gives this group of people anxiety. And so I think that it's important to look at both of the sides to make a solid argument to go against such a setting of not just neoliberalism. Even when it brings something good, it is still like making us super anxious and make us burn out. So basically, my argument is like market feminism could be solid and valid, but at the cost of burning out. And how is it received by a feminist audience? I guess we would have to see. But upon publication of the book, I was also thinking that if I was working, if I was the, if I was writing for a group that is marginalized, I can hand this book out to them and say that, hey, I make you the hero. Like, because usually the narrative is that the marginalized are also the group that are deprived of the voices, right? Whose voice are deprived, the subaltern, they cannot speak. So we need to use this platform to let them speak. But however, for my group of research respondents, they already have the platform to speak. But now I'm showing like another side of their story, um, which I also find, which I also find perplexing. Don't know how to put it in a better way. But let's say Jing is the one that brought me to the field. But it's also the incident of her husband sexually harassing me that ended the entire field work. I haven't talked to her about that incident, but would she be happy when she read it? So yeah, there are a lot of things that I need to think out of this. And I would also be very curious about how other feminist audience would receive this book.
Dr. Tang, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. Your conclusion gestures toward looking into market feminism without burnout, even while acknowledging how deeply neoliberalism, patriarchy, and nationalism are intertwined. After finishing the book, did your own view of what a less exploitative, more sustaining market feminism might look like the change in any way?
Right. So the concluding chapter is actually the chapter that I have changed it, I think, the most from my PhD thesis, which I finished in 2021. And so both are open access, so people can feel free to compare. But basically, in the conclusion, I was also adding the new the new changes in regard to the Chinese economic sphere. Because when I was doing my field work, it seemed so certain that China is going to literally like surpass the US and become the world's largest economy. People were still very optimistic. But then since COVID, many things have changed. And also even with Jack Ma, and also how Alibaba is perceived in China with Jack Ma disappeared for a few years in mainland China, and also with the death of Premium Li Keqiang and how the mourning of that death was received in China. So now we sort of see like a narrative sort of changing towards a more security based governmentality. And then so there are many things that I try to conclude in this chapter, including that to an extent, perhaps market in itself assumes a more quote unquote feminized role in the post-socialist society. And but it was also around the same time that we have a truly popularization of feminism since the 2020. So since 2020, feminism has become just truly, truly, truly popular in Chinese digital sphere. Um, of course, it involves like many of the tragic gender-based violence cases that made feminism like a key debate. But it was also with this generation of women uh, coming across, let's say, Me Too movement, coming across different discussions online, having a very strong sort of autonomy and also like thinking of what being feminist would mean to them. And then we see a lot of like films, popular music, and etc. really discussing what feminism is. And then we see the popularity of feminist scholars, including Dai Jinghua and also the Japanese feminist scholar Shizuko Inoue, being super popular and the book being bestseller in China too. So it is really up to. So I've been doing research on this afterwards. So I think there is a chance that we can look at market feminism without burning out, because if we no longer hinge all our hope on to economic growth, then of course there may be other ways that we can make a very self-sustained community or market practice within the market. So that's basically the conclusion.
Thank you, Dr. Ling Tang, for sharing these powerful insights into burnout, market feminism, and the lives of urban Chinese businesswomen in the internet age. Your work not only help us understand contemporary China, but also invite us to reflect on the cost of empowerment in the digital economies everywhere. To our listeners, we hope this conversation stays with you as you think about work, success, and care in your own lives. Thank you for joining us on Business Talk, and we look forward to having you with us in the next episode. Thank you once again, Dr. Ling Tan.
Thank you.